My beloved child, do not move past this moment too quickly. Something has been pressing against the silence, waiting for the exact second when your heart would be still enough to hear it. You may have arrived here believing this was only another message, another passing moment in an ordinary day, but what you are about to hear carries a weight that has been building far longer than you realize. Pause here. There is something hidden beneath the surface of a connection you thought had gone quiet, and the truth is not what you have been imagining. Someone you once felt deeply, someone whose presence still finds strange ways to return to your thoughts, has been carrying words they should have spoken long ago. And now those unsaid words have become heavier than they ever expected. You have wondered why their energy seemed to change. You have wondered why someone who once appeared confident could suddenly become distant, unpredictable, almost unreachable. There were moments when you questioned whether they ever cared at all. There were nights when you replayed conversations, searching for the sentence where everything began to fall apart. You blamed timing. You blamed circumstances. At times, you even blamed yourself. But heaven has watched the parts you could not see. The truth unfolding behind their silence was never as simple as rejection, indifference, or forgetting you. Something happened inside them after they walked away from the moment when honesty could have changed everything, and that decision has followed them into places they never expected it to reach. They thought silence would protect them. That is the first revelation you must understand. They believed that by keeping certain feelings hidden, they could remain in control. They convinced themselves that if they did not confess how deeply you affected them, they could eventually move forward without disrupting the life they had already built around themselves. They told themselves they were being practical. They called it patience. They called it caution. They even tried to convince themselves that you would be better without the truth. But deep inside, they knew there was another reason. They were afraid. Not afraid of you, beloved child. They were afraid of what loving you required them to admit about themselves. Because meeting you awakened something they had managed to avoid for years. There was a version of them that knew how to survive without being truly seen. They could smile at the right time, answer questions without revealing too much, and move through relationships while protecting the deepest chambers of their heart. People around them believed they were strong because they rarely showed uncertainty. They had become skilled at hiding longing behind responsibility and disguising fear as independence. Then you entered their emotional world, perhaps gently, perhaps unexpectedly, and suddenly their usual defenses stopped working. You noticed things other people overlooked. You felt the hesitation behind their words. You sensed when their laughter carried sadness. You saw the person beneath the image they worked so hard to maintain. That frightened them more than they ever admitted. There was a moment, one specific moment, that keeps returning to them now. It may have seemed small to you. Perhaps it was a conversation that ended too soon. Perhaps it was a look held 1 second longer than usual. Perhaps you asked them a question, and instead of answering honestly, they changed the subject. Heaven saw what happened inside them then. Their heart rose toward the truth, but fear pulled the words back down. They nearly told you. They almost said what they had been carrying. They almost allowed everything between you to become real. But they stopped. And that unfinished moment became the beginning of their regret. At first, they believed they would have another opportunity. They thought there would always be another conversation, another evening, another chance to explain everything when they felt more prepared. They did not understand that certain windows in life feel ordinary only because we do not recognize their importance until they begin to close. They waited for courage to arrive perfectly. They waited for certainty. They waited for the conditions to become easier. And while they waited, distance began doing what distance always does. It started creating questions where honesty should have been. You felt that distance too. You may remember wondering why they pulled back exactly when something between you seemed to be getting stronger. You may have interpreted their silence as a sign that they had changed their mind. And because you have a heart that has learned not to beg someone to recognize your value, you began protecting yourself. Perhaps you stopped reaching out as often. Perhaps you became quieter. Perhaps you told yourself that if they wanted to speak, they knew where to find you. What you did not know was that your silence became a mirror. Suddenly, they were forced to live without the reassurance of your presence. The messages they once expected were no longer guaranteed. The warmth they took for granted became a memory. The little ways you made them feel understood disappeared from their ordinary routine, and only then did they begin to understand the size of what they had refused to acknowledge. Listen closely, because this is where the story goes deeper. Their regret is not simply about losing communication with you. It is about realizing that they withheld a truth that may have changed the entire direction of your connection. They keep returning to the same question: what if I had told them? What if I had said it before everything became complicated? What if I had trusted them with the truth instead of making the decision for both of us? That question has become a quiet companion to them. It follows them during the hours when distractions are gone. It appears when they hear a song connected to a memory. It returns when they see something that reminds them of a conversation you once had. There are moments when they reach for their phone almost automatically, then stop. They begin writing something, then erase it. They imagine your reaction. They fear you have moved beyond the point where their explanation would matter. Yet that is still not the deepest source of their regret. There is something they never told you about why they pulled away. For a long time, they allowed you to believe their hesitation was about you. They let circumstances speak for them because telling the full truth would have forced them to expose a wound they had hidden even from people closest to them. Before you, there had been disappointment. There had been promises that did not survive. There had been experiences that taught them to expect abandonment exactly when they began to care deeply. So when their feelings for you became undeniable, an old alarm inside them awakened. They did not think, "I do not want this." They thought, "What happens if I want this more than I can survive losing it?" That fear changed their behavior. You saw inconsistency where there was internal conflict. You saw distance where there was panic. You saw hesitation and wondered whether your connection had been imagined, while they were fighting an invisible battle between love and self-protection. They wanted you close, but closeness threatened the walls they had spent years constructing. And instead of telling you that truth, they chose the one strategy they had always used when emotions became overwhelming: they withdrew. They believed withdrawal would calm everything. Instead, it magnified everything. Because once you were no longer within easy reach, their feelings did not disappear. They became clearer. The space that was supposed to help them forget you began showing them how deeply your presence had become woven into their inner life. They started remembering details they had not realized they were storing, the way you responded when they were vulnerable, the words you used when they were discouraged, the way you made something ordinary feel meaningful simply because you were there. And then came the realization that changed them. They understood that what they had feared losing was already slipping away because they had been too afraid to claim it. That is when regret began turning into something heavier. Do not misunderstand this message, beloved child. You are not being asked to carry another person's sadness. You are not responsible for rescuing anyone from the consequences of their choices. Heaven does not place another person's emotional healing on your shoulders. But you are being shown the truth because for too long you questioned whether your intuition had been wrong. You wondered whether the connection had meant more to you than it meant to them. You wondered whether you had imagined the intensity. You did not imagine everything, there were things they felt and never said. And one of those things is far greater than you knew. There was a point when they had already made a decision about you in their heart. Before the silence grew, before confusion entered, before fear complicated everything, they had quietly imagined a future in which you remained. They pictured conversations that had not happened yet. They imagined introducing you differently to people in their life. They thought about what it would be like to no longer hide their feelings behind ambiguity. There were moments when they almost allowed themselves to believe you could become part of the life they had secretly wanted. But they never told you. Instead, they gave you fragments. A little affection here. A meaningful sentence there. A moment of vulnerability followed by sudden distance. They thought these fragments would be enough to keep the connection alive until they became brave enough for complete honesty. They did not realize fragments can confuse a heart more than silence because they create hope without clarity. You were left trying to understand a language they refused to finish speaking. And now they are confronting that. Something recently forced them to see the situation differently. Perhaps it was a conversation with someone who knows them well. Perhaps they witnessed another person choose courage where they had chosen fear. Perhaps they realized you were no longer emotionally waiting in the same way. Whatever the exact circumstance, a truth pierced through the excuses they had been using, and the realization was simple. They might have lost the chance to tell you while the words still had somewhere to land. That thought shook them. The phrase, "too late," began appearing in their mind in ways it had never appeared before. Until then, they had secretly believed the connection was paused, not ended. They assumed some invisible thread would keep you emotionally available no matter how long they remained silent. But now they understand that your life did not stop merely because they were undecided. You kept growing. You kept becoming. You began learning how to protect your peace without closing your heart. And they can feel the difference. There is a particular kind of regret that arrives when someone realizes the person they expected to remain emotionally nearby has finally begun choosing themselves. That is the regret surrounding them now. They do not simply miss you. They are beginning to understand why losing access to your heart feels so different from every other distance they have experienced. You gave them something rare, emotional safety without forcing them to perform for it. You saw potential in them while still noticing their flaws. You offered warmth without demanding perfection. Even when you became confused, a part of you continued hoping there was a truth beneath their behavior that would eventually explain everything. There was. But the explanation came too late for the version of you who once waited without boundaries. And this is where heaven turns the message toward you. Your journey through this connection was never only about whether two people would come together. It was also about teaching you the difference between love and emotional suspension. You were never meant to spend your life standing at the doorway of someone else's indecision. Love may ask for patience, but it does not ask you to disappear while another person decides whether your heart deserves honesty. You needed to learn that your compassion is sacred, but it is not permission for someone to leave you in uncertainty forever. This is why the silence had a purpose you could not understand while you were inside it. You thought you were losing them. In reality, you were beginning to find yourself again. There were pieces of you that had quietly rearranged themselves around the hope that they would finally speak. Your mood became connected to their attention. Your peace sometimes depended on whether they reached out. You interpreted tiny signals because clear words were missing. And although you did not intend to, you began giving their uncertainty more authority than your own inner knowing. Heaven could not allow that pattern to become your permanent home. So the distance that hurt you also began strengthening you. You started remembering who you were before you needed their answer. You began realizing that being chosen should not require you to convince someone of your worth. You started understanding that the right connection is not built by one person carrying all the emotional courage. And while you were learning this lesson, they were learning another. They were learning the price of silence. There is a strange reversal taking place now. For so long, you were the one waiting for clarity while they controlled the distance. Now they are the one wondering where they stand. They are the one looking for signs. They are the one replaying conversations and searching for meaning. But this is not punishment. Heaven does not reveal this so you can celebrate another person's pain. The purpose is understanding. Their regret has become a teacher in the same way your uncertainty became yours. They are finally seeing what fear cost them. Yet something still remains unsaid. There was one truth they intended to tell you on more than one occasion. This was not simply, "I miss you." It was not merely, "I care about you." Those words would have been easier. What they wanted to confess went deeper. They wanted to tell you that your presence had changed the way they understood love itself. Before you, they thought love was supposed to be controlled, negotiated, carefully measured so no one gained enough power to hurt them. They believed keeping part of themselves hidden was wisdom. Then they met you, and for the first time, hiding began to hurt more than vulnerability. You made them want to tell the truth. That was precisely why they ran from it. There was a night when they came closer than ever. They had the words ready. They imagined the entire conversation. They knew what they wanted to say. They may even have opened a message, stared at your name, and felt their heart racing. But something stopped them. Fear whispered that revealing everything would change your relationship forever. And fear was right. It would have. What fear did not tell them was that refusing to speak would also change everything. So they closed the message. They delayed the conversation. They told themselves tomorrow would be easier. Tomorrow became another tomorrow. Then life shifted. Your energy changed. The doorway they assumed would always remain open began closing quietly. And now they would give almost anything to return to that moment with the courage they have only gained after losing certainty. There is something deeply human about realizing the value of truth after silence has already caused damage. But beloved child, remember this: regret does not automatically equal readiness. Their heart may finally understand what it lost, but understanding must eventually become action if anything is truly going to change. Words imagined in private cannot rebuild trust. Love hidden forever cannot create a relationship. And regret, no matter how intense, is not the same as transformation. Heaven is showing you their emotional state, but it is also protecting you from interpreting their pain as proof that you must immediately reopen every door. Watch what comes next. Because if they approach you, the greatest question will not be whether they still feel something. They do. The question will be whether they have become brave enough to live differently. Can they communicate where they once disappeared? Can they tell the truth where they once offered confusion? Can they take responsibility without turning their fear into your burden? Can they meet the stronger version of you without asking you to shrink back into the person who waited? Those questions matter more than any dramatic declaration. And your heart knows this now. There is also another layer to what they are carrying, one they have barely admitted even to themselves. They regret something specific they allowed you to believe. During the period when they were withdrawing, they created an impression that was not entirely true. They may have acted as though they were unaffected. They may have appeared happier, busier, or emotionally detached. They may have allowed other people, circumstances, or appearances to convince you they had moved on effortlessly. They did that because they wanted to hide how shaken they really were. Pride became a mask. They did not want you to know how often they thought about you because then they would have needed to explain why they were not doing anything about it. So they performed distance. But private reality was different. There were moments after conversations ended when they stared at the screen longer than you knew. There were times they almost reached out because something happened and you were the first person they wanted to tell. There were places they went where a memory of you suddenly changed their mood. They learned that physical distance does not erase emotional imprint. And now the mask is becoming exhausting. They are tired of pretending they do not care about what they desperately wish they had handled differently. But there is still one confession stronger than all the others. It is the sentence they fear you may never hear from them. This sentence explains why they have been unable to completely release the connection. It explains why attempts to distract themselves have not created the peace they expected. It explains why their regret became so intense only after they sensed you emotionally moving forward. And before that sentence is revealed, you must understand what it means for you. You are standing at a threshold. The old version of this story was built around waiting. The next version cannot be. Whatever happens, you are being invited to move from expectation into discernment. If someone returns, you are allowed to listen without surrendering your boundaries. You are allowed to love and still ask for consistency. You are allowed to forgive without pretending the past never happened. Most importantly, you are allowed to require truth. Because the next chapter will not be decided by how deeply they regret the past. It will be decided by what both of you are willing to do differently now. And something in them knows this. That is why they are afraid. They understand that if they speak now, they cannot come with half-truths anymore. They cannot approach you with vague hints and expect you to reconstruct the rest. They cannot place the emotional work back into your hands. They must say it clearly. They must finally reveal the thing they once believed was safer to hide. The truth is beginning to rise toward the surface. Even now, they are wrestling with whether to let it out. Part of them thinks you deserve to know. Another part fears hearing what you will say once you do. But the pressure of keeping it hidden is becoming stronger than the fear of confession. And that is why this moment matters. Because there is one detail about their silence that changes everything you thought you understood. They did not only fail to tell you how they felt. They failed to tell you about a decision they had already made concerning you. A decision that existed before the distance. A decision they abandoned because fear convinced them they were not ready. And now, after everything that has happened, they are realizing that walking away from that decision may have been the greatest mistake they have made in matters of the heart. The words are finally returning to them. The same words they swallowed when they still had the chance to say them easily. They have imagined looking into your eyes and admitting the truth without hiding behind excuses. They know the confession could change everything. But there is one part of it you still do not know. One promise they almost made. One future they almost invited you into. One reason they hesitated that had nothing to do with a lack of love. And when you understand what they were about to tell you before they disappeared into silence, the entire story between you will look different. Because the sentence they never finished was not simply, "I love you." It began with something far more serious. And the final words of that unfinished confession are the very words they are now terrified they waited too long to say.